Ditch those clowns and jokers. Join me in the middle with your independent minds. All you've got to do is click the subscribe button and ring that little bell, and you'll then get the most independent presentations on all of YouTube. Thanks for watching.
The Phoenix Suns and the Milwaukee Bucks played game one of the NBA Finals. Suns won 118-105. I can't tell you that I watched. If the Sixers were in it, I'd probably be watching. I guess that makes me a fair weather fan. Nor am I an ESPN guy. So I'm sure I should surrender my man card at the door as I leave today. I do, however, know of Rachel Nichols. And I know of Rachel Nichols from ESPN because when I was getting my start at CNN 7 or 8 years ago, my recollection is that she was then at Headline News. That part I'm not positive about, but this part I'm sure of, and that is that she was offered to me on a fairly regular basis as a sports guest. And on several occasions, I hosted her as a guest of mine on CNN and found her to be competent, insightful, hardworking. So that's how I know her, as someone that I have in the past interviewed about sports stories. My having interviewed her is one of the reasons that I took interest in this story about the kerfuffle at ESPN. The other reason that I took interest in this story is that I think the controversy playing itself out at ESPN between Rachel Nichols and Maria Taylor and other co-workers is indicative of what goes on in many workplaces across the country. It's a story about one person thinking they were denied in a gig or an opportunity in favor of another employee, and that race somehow played a factor. You'll have to decide whether that assessment was itself racist. I have my doubts, but the survey question of the day at smerconish.com, and I hope that after listening to what I have to say, you'll vote on today's survey question, is whether it's necessarily, meaning by definition, racist to question a diversity hire. And I've tried to ask it in the abstract so as to not be totally tied to these facts, because as I say, I think the issue here is bigger than just ESPN. This story popped over the weekend when the New York Times did it in a real big way. Kevin Draper is the author of the original reporting, and he has since updated his coverage. And it pertains to comments that were made nearly a year ago when Rachel Nichols learned that she would not be hosting the 2020 finals as she had been expecting, the NBA finals. Let me try and summarize the facts based on Draper's coverage and then frame a couple of the issues here for you. Draper writes the following: in mid-July of last year, Nichols was staying at the Coronado Springs Resort at Walt Disney World near Orlando, Florida, confined to her room for 7 days because of the NBA's coronavirus protocols before the season resumed. She had with her a video camera so that she could continue appearing on ESPN shows, primarily The Jump, which is a daily NBA show that has been hosted by her since 2016. But she was eyeing hosting duties for ESPN's pregame and postgame shows during the playoffs and the finals. Those are the network's most important studio basketball programs. The host is the face of ESPN's NBA coverage, and before the pandemic, both she and Maria Taylor both hosted different versions of the show. About the time that Nichols arrives in Florida, she's told by executives that Maria Taylor will be hosting the coverage of the NBA Finals. Now, Maria Taylor is African-American, younger than Rachel Nichols, very attractive, an ESPN sports analyst, a former University of Georgia athlete, by all accounts, similarly competent, similarly hardworking. In 2019, she began hosting NBA Countdown, which is a Friday night and a Sunday afternoon program associated with their coverage of the games. The call that brings this all to light is of critical importance. And here's what the Times reported. Nichols discussed her career on a phone call. It was July 13 of 2020 with Adam Mendelson. He's the longtime advisor to Lakers superstar LeBron James, and also on the line, James's agent, Rich Paul. Nichols was speaking with Mendelson to request an interview with James and his Lakers teammate, Anthony Davis, whom Paul also represents. And during the conversation, she sought advice from Mendelson because she believed her bosses were advancing Taylor at her expense, which suggests to me that Rachel Nichols is on the phone with these sport contacts, looking to set up interviews and so forth, but seizes the opportunity to tap their expertise about her own situation. And she says this: I just want them to go somewhere else. It's in my contract, by the way. This job is in my contract in writing. She was referring to hosting coverage of the NBA Finals. And then she said that ESPN was feeling pressure about racial diversity. This is Rachel Nichols on the phone call that I've described.
I wish Maria Taylor all the success in the world. She covers football, she covers basketball. If you need to give her more things to do because you're feeling pressure about your crappy long-time record on diversity, which, by the way, I myself know personally from the female side of it, go for it. Just, find it somewhere else. You're not going to find it with me and taking my thing away.
So what I hear her saying is, hey, ESPN, you've got a bad track record when it comes to diversity. And now you're trying to level that playing field. Okay, but don't do it at my expense. Because after all, I'm under contract for this gig. I don't hear her explicitly criticize or say anything critical of her cohort, Maria Taylor. Now, I know that some say, well, implicitly, she's using diversity, she's using race as a factor. So she kind of really is making that point. What you should be wondering at this moment is, how did this all come to light? Again, from the Draper coverage in the New York Times, unbeknown to Nichols, her video camera was on, and the call was being recorded to a server at ESPN headquarters in Bristol, Connecticut. It's not clear why her camera was on, but most people at ESPN believe that Nichols, using new technology during the pandemic, didn't turn it off properly. Lesson for all of us there. It was effectively the remote pandemic version of a hot mic incident. Dozens of ESPN employees have access to the company's video servers as part of their normal workflow. At least one of these people watched the video on the server, recorded it on a cell phone, and shared it with others. And soon more copies of the conversation were spreading around ESPN. And within hours, it reached ESPN executives in part because of some of the comments from Mendelson. I'll get to that in a moment. But can I just say that the clearest observation that I have, the clearest conclusion that I have about this whole episode is that the worst actor in the whole situation is whomever rolled tape at ESPN. I mean, that's pretty low to roll tape and then distribute it based on this private communication. Back to Mendelson. Mendelson in that conversation, Mendelson's white, by the way, says, quote, I don't know, I'm exhausted. Between Me Too and Black Lives Matter, I got nothing left. Nichols then laughed. Mendelson is the guy who really escaped or dodged the bullet here, because I maintain that if this audio came to light and Rachel Nichols were not a part of it, and all we had were Mendelson's comments, then I think people would be saying, wait a minute, what does he mean he's a white guy and he's exhausted by Me Too and Black Lives Matter? Instead, we're all talking about Rachel Nichols. Nichols and Mendelson went on to discuss the culture at ESPN headquarters. I think this is also of interest. She said, quote, those same people who are like generally white conservative male Trump voters is part of the reason I've had a hard time at ESPN. I basically finally just outworked everyone for so long that they had to recognize it. I don't want to be a victim of them trying to play catch up for the same damage that affected me in the first place. You know what I mean. I think what she means is that I myself have been the victim of discriminatory practices as a female. And therefore, I don't want them now to be a victim of playing. I don't want to be a victim of playing catch up. Like, hey, now they're going to level the playing field for people of color, and it will come at the expense of another woman. That's the background on this situation. There's a lot more to it. African Americans, some of them upset, and I think rightfully so, because they wonder, is this the way that white folks who pay us lip service act behind closed doors? From the Times coverage, they were especially upset by what they perceived as Nichols' expression of a common criticism used by white workers in many workplaces to disparage non-white colleagues, that Taylor was offered the hosting job only because of her race, not because she was the best person for the job. Well, that's not exactly what Nichols said, although I understand how some would interpret it that way. I listened to that audio and I don't hear Nichols explicitly disparaging Taylor's work. You could say, as I referenced a moment ago, that she's doing it explicitly by questioning her elevation amidst of discussion of diversity. I mean, why would Nichols have referenced diversity if she weren't making that point? I hear her more questioning ESPN and saying, you got a bad track record, you're now trying to do something to improve it, but you're overlooking my interest and your contractual obligation to me in the process. Here's an interesting question. If Rachel Nichols believes that she's being displaced unfairly, and if the other employee is a person of color or a minority of some other kind, how can she frame that issue? What can she say that will not subject her, in some people's minds, to a charge of racism? It's very hard to navigate. And as I say, I think that this is a situation that probably plays itself out in many, if not most, workplaces that have some degree of a diverse workforce. Again, her comment, I wish Maria Taylor all the success in the world. She covers football, she covers basketball. If you need to give her more things to do because you are feeling pressure about your crappy longtime record on diversity, which, by the way, I know personally from the female side of it, just go for it. Just find it somewhere else. You are not going to find it from me or taking my thing away. The comments in the blogosphere are really interesting on this. One from a person self-described of color who says, let's move on. The competition between high-profile employees in any workplace generally brings out misguided feelings. Hers were taped. She apologized. Hopefully her apology was accepted. Honestly, as a Black person, this doesn't even make my list of the top 100 concerns Black folks should be focused on. Instead, both of them are still employed, still getting paid. Meanwhile, we've got gun violence, we've got homelessness, mental illness, voter suppression, miseducation, poor city services, healthcare concerns, and 93 other things the media should be devoting attention to. And then my favorite part of that comment, the guy said, please don't like my comment if it validates your own racism. I think which means that a white person shouldn't look at this self-described person of color and say, well, yeah, even he said it, and thereby insulate their own racist intentions. But perhaps the exchange that encapsulates just how people can look at this Rachel Nichols, Maria Taylor situation and come to totally different conclusions is embodied in this brief exchange from two commenters in the blogosphere. The first, there is no racism here. Point it out to me. What did Rachel say that was racist? Then a response was this. The response was, she said that Taylor got the assignment because of ESPN's diversity efforts, the pressure they are feeling. She attributed Taylor's success merely to the color of her skin. That's racism. Which is it? Is it ever appropriate for someone who believes they're being displaced by a person who's a minority to say they think that's a factor, or inherently, by definition, is that racist? If you evaluate your work dynamic and think that you're being passed over for someone because of that criteria, can you say it without being racist? That's what I'm trying to get to in the survey question today at smerconish.com. I hope you'll take the time to go over and cast a ballot and post a comment here, because I look forward to reading all of them. I hope you're a subscriber, and if not, subscribe right here and ring that little bell. Thank you.